This is really starting to sound like the story of the boy who cried wolf. And ironically, Toto Wolff is siding with McLaren on this one. But in all seriousness, all this has done is basically given Zak Brown even more reason to screw around with Christian Horner. I know that some of you out there might think I'm basically biased toward McLaren and that I would never believe they would cheat. But the narrative has taken a rather interesting twist. A narrative where McLaren and Mercedes stand together, leaving Red Bull out in the cold. Honestly, this has become yet another sting in the tail when it comes to the everlasting saga between Zak Brown and Christian Horner, which was then immortalised in this most recent season of Drive to Survive. In short, this is basically more team principal drama, and I think a lot of you are here for it. This is nothing new, this latest saga regarding brake drums and cooling and what have you. May I remind you of the most recent and notorious example of this, the Brawn car of 2009, which caught all the big heavy hitters napping. Using pre-exit Honda funding, they perfected the double diffuser. In fact, you could say they pioneered it. Bigger teams, they pushed for a ban, part frustration, part cost saving, since replicating it would be expensive, and it was. And it was the biggest example of, hey, it's far cheaper to try and ban something out of existence than to have to admit defeat, say they were right, it was legal, and you have to come up with your own version, which will probably take weeks in the wind tunnel, several $100,000, or even millions. So, yeah, what's a couple of grand in terms of a protest if it can save you hundreds of thousands in the back end? So here we are right now. McLaren are at the centre of this latest fracas. They are taking names, taking wins, poles, trophies, what have you, being challenged by the likes of Red Bull regarding their car being illegal, and subsequently swatting them away, and effectively ending the dominance in this regulation cycle that Red Bull had arguably since the middle of 2022, when they got their weight down in the RB18. And I noticed this really took an uptick of Red Bull mounting protests against McLaren right when they essentially lost the constructors' lead. Cue all the protests around Baku, and then, of course, the mini DRS thing. Because yes, Red Bull kept on raising suspicions and had them promptly whittled out of the stadium by the governing body. This ensuing drama has played out in headlines. Each technical claim triggered FIA checks, rule clarifications, and then public sparring between the principals. The worst that the FIA did was just go, "Naughty McLaren, that was very cheeky of you, I appreciate the innovation, but hey, for this future race, why don't we just dial it back, or, just make it not as effective, or maybe get rid of it, yeah? What about the F-duct of McLaren in 2010, which then was born into DRS? There was DAS and Mercedes in 2020. That was deemed legal for 2020, but the following seasons, nah, you couldn't have it. So anyone who's brand new to Formula One, first of all, welcome, but yeah, this is a tale as old as time. This is a classic tale of cat and mouse. The cats being the regulators, the mice being the engineers. But what I find really fascinating here is how McLaren openly welcomes scrutiny. And in the latest protest, Zak Brown even had the public backing of one of their rivals, Toto Wolff. Him saying this. Ahem. I think that the team around Zak Brown, Andrea Stella, Rob Marshall, these are good people with integrity. If in the past we often say, well, let's look at whether there's something borderline, but I have no doubt that these guys, McLaren, stay within the rules. It's just really good development with that car. They've understood how to manage the tyre much better than everybody else, and, in my opinion, it's totally legit. Now, this is both interesting and not surprising at all. It has become yet another opportunity for Toto to once more point at Christian Horner and say that all that Red Bull's giving F1 right now is a lot of shouting, shaking of fists, and cries of foul noise. It's that same point of view that he was fielding during that recent F1 Commission meeting regarding the situation of the 2026 power unit. Horner arguing that, oh, if things continue the way they are right now, it could cause an absolute media frenzy and a storm of the negative kind like F1 saw in 2014, which, to be fair, was pretty bad, and that was a year I barely watched F1. But Wolff has remained firm on this matter, and he's remaining firm on this thing with McLaren, that he's just allowing the chips to lay as they lie and just work it out as you get there. Ultimately, in Mercedes' point of view, it's just they have to work harder to try and overcome McLaren. They have to come up with their own innovations. And it just became another chapter in this ongoing feud, and now Toto wading into this three-team principal spat. We got Brown, we got Horner, we got Wolff, Vasseur somewhat on the periphery, but he's only got his own lot with Hamilton and Leclerc to deal with. But with these three, it's just absolutely getting absurd. In short, it's just an opportunity for Mercedes to belittle Red Bull even more. On the surface, he's simply vouching for a rival team's honesty and genuine competitiveness. Yet underneath the praise, you can see a mix of politics, psychology, and self-interest at work. The comments signal that Mercedes believe McLaren's pace is real, that Red Bull's accusations have become counterproductive noise to the entire operation of the sport, and that maybe the Silver Arrows themselves have more to gain by backing a customer partner than by joining the chorus of suspicion. Because you've only got to look at where McLaren and Mercedes are right now. Development-wise, they're in a good place. Sure, Mercedes can't really hold a candle to McLaren at the moment. We've got upgrades coming for them in Imola, but right now, they are second fiddle. And as far as they're concerned in this regulation cycle, being second in the constructors handily over everyone else, Red Bull, Ferrari, that'll do. And all the while, the RB21's development is wobbling around all over the place. No one's quite sure whether or not it's come back, or is it all over. It just seems to depend on each track as we go. This whole thing with Toto, it's just become opportunistic, honestly. It's just an opportunity to dig at Christian in a way that can easily be proved on the track. Say, oh, when you look at that, Red Bull is all over the place. Not like Mercedes, we managed to rise above the situation we had with Lewis with our car. Kimi and George in the car, we're absolutely doing fantastic, and that is great, and Zak's doing well with our engine, so Mercedes power is the way to go. Anyway, you're probably wondering what exactly is the issue this time. This whole thing about brake ducts and what have you, you hear drums, etc. What's the actual thing that's going on here, Law? Yeah, see, it's all to do with the McLaren. Well, that car is just a genuinely chill guy. Something of which Red Bull with Max Verstappen at Bahrain and Miami especially seem to be struggling with. Remember Max's radio gripes about failing brakes and overheating tyres? McLaren doesn't share that issue, which likely sparked this latest protest. Nerf their rivals to slow them down rather than spend money on fixing their own problem and thusly divert resources away from their other priorities regarding the overall pace of the car and its balance. Again, it's a tale as old as time. Just nerf the competition, which means that you can catch up instead of having to divert resources and going away from the fundamental issue that Max has with the car. The MCL39's brake cooling keeps tyre temps in check, a big edge over the Red Bull car. Cooler tyres degrade slower, but the balance is delicate. It's a major win on hot tracks like Miami and Jeddah and Bahrain, and then you get rivals complaining that there must be some hidden trick or something like that, like a hidden water spray or something like that, or a means that is against the rules of the FIA to cool down the brakes in manners that have not been discovered by other teams and are questionable and outside of the scope of the actual rules. But it seems like, based on all of these investigations coming up with absolutely butt-kiss, that McLaren have simply just innovated their way out of the problem, right before a regulation cycle, which in of itself could effectively guarantee them defending the Constructors' title this year, because all the other teams, they can either try and copy it and waste time for 2026, or just simply hold their hands up and go, yeah, okay, McLaren, you win. But Red Bull's not going down without a fight. And this is not the first time McLaren's brakes have been brought into question here. Remember in Hungary last year where there were rumblings as to the brakes then regarding certain holes that really shouldn't have been there? Because an uncovered hole was seen at that race, and it was explained away as a means for sensor access for the FIA's own facilitation. Once told to cover it, McLaren taped it up and moved on. End of the matter as far as everyone was concerned. And as we saw that weekend, it was the least of McLaren's problems. Fast forward to Miami just gone, and the FIA is at it again with the brakes. Many people pointing out there was some sort of indiscrepancies regarding hot and cool spots on the particular tyres, because some outside party, according to motorsport.com, had thermal images of the McLaren tyres that Red Bull came into the possession of, and it pointed out certain blue spots on the tyres which were a little bit anomalous, as in, well, that's a little bit weird. Why on earth would they be there in comparison to the rest of the compound and the actual tread? Yes, of course, that is a very interesting phenomena, and naturally that evidence would have been brought to the FIA's attention, but the conclusion from the FIA is that there was once again no wrongdoing to be had. The design was looked at closely. In fact, there will be a report that is coming out, I think, next week or something, where the FIA has gone into forensic detail, as in, this is really super duper detailed. This is far more than a standard technical inquiry. And since we've not heard any rumblings so far, it's quite safe to say that McLaren will also be cleared of this one, and that this forensic detail is probably there to silence the likes of Red Bull and say, look, the brakes, they're legit. We've looked at it really, really closely, more closely than necessarily, and here you go. And may I remind you about Rob freaking Marshall, the lead engineer of McLaren. He, alongside Adrian Newey at Red Bull, they were absolutely dynamite, absolutely fantastic. And with McLaren, yeah, they couldn't get Adrian Newey, but at least they got one of them. They got one of the dream team. Now, this next part, I'm going to need the foam of doubt here, because I'm not an engineer, let's be honest here. I'm just a guy on a ladder. But I think maybe the reason why Red Bull are particularly hot on this train of thought regarding brakes is that, as far as I can gather for next year's regulations, the brake systems themselves are going to be left relatively untouched, save for some basic fundamentals regarding size of brakes or something to do with the panel management for having an electrical component which is bigger than this year. Let me know in the comments if you're an engineer, is this the right train of thought? Because yes, there would be some modifications made in time for next year to fit a different power delivery system from the combined hybrid unit what we've got, as well as general space, because I think the brake drums will be smaller. But the point of issue Red Bull has with McLaren is to do with the cooling and the aerodynamic side of things, which in theory could be untouched. It is standing to reason that if you can sort out the brakes this year, you can go into next year with a really good head start. And right now, Red Bull has got a problem with its brakes and warming of the tyres above the overall standards that they need, overheating, which then compounds, it lacks pace, Max Verstappen has to race harder, then the tyres get warmer. It's a never-ending cycle here, people. So Red Bull's looking at that and just going, well, we got to give it a go, try and stop them for some reason. Yeah, try and peg them back a bit right before when we get the flexi-wing changes at the Spanish Grand Prix, which may curtail McLaren's fight back or domination, or it may not. It depends on how big a grin we see on Zak Brown's face after Q3. But unless Red Bull can sort this out or successfully prove there is something nefarious going on here, they're in trouble. Especially with Max Verstappen breathing down the technical team's neck, akin to how Lewis Hamilton did so with Mercedes in 2024. So yes, there is a motivation to halt McLaren in their tracks, if their cooling system is able to be transferred in some part to next year's car. But McLaren's consistent transparency has reassured the FIA. They are therefore, McLaren, in good standing. This is a major turnaround that on a technical level, McLaren is indeed legit in the eyes of the governing body. Now I know that will not wash with some people, that you might have your own spanner of speculation saying that, oh, the FIA is trying to stop Max Verstappen winning another title. Yeah, we had these kind of accusations when Michael Schumacher was dominating. The FIA changing the regulations all the time to try and stop Ferrari's domination, which succeeded in 2005. It does happen, but in terms of the fundamentals regarding the rules of the brakes, well, these have been cleared, and this report on Wednesday is going to be very, very interesting to pass through if we actually get public access to it, or it's just within the teams. So, okay then, Law, what does this actually mean for Christian Horner if every single protest Red Bull mounts gets just rebuffed or something like that? Well, financially speaking, at the moment, it's no biggie. According to the sporting regulations, I think the International Sporting Code Article 17.1 states that if you mount a protest, it costs you about €2,000. That's small potatoes in Formula 1, but it can easily add up if we get more and more of these over the year. And not to mention the optics regarding repeated failures. That will come with its own price tag, I can assure you. So could it lead to Christian Horner being discredited or maybe getting punished himself and Red Bull may be affected? Right now, no. Red Bull can carry on protesting, but every time a case fails, it costs them money and chips away at their credibility. And of course, may I remind you of Appendix B, that the stewards have far more power, and the FIA president himself has said that he expects the stewards to show strength. If we get situations where Christian Horner continuously just puts out protest after protest and they get smacked back with it's all clear, it's all good, and if Christian Horner gets very fiery about it and questions the legitimacy of the stewards, that could easily fall under the jurisdiction of Appendix B, Article 12.2.2 or what have you, and therefore could be causing moral injury to the stewards in question. There may be a situation where Red Bull can no longer have protests without some really good solid evidence to back them up, or they might run the risks of being fined themselves. Let's just say that right now. Every time they put in a protest and it doesn't come out the way they want it to, then it's just not going to reflect well. Their standing will be bad, McLaren's will be good. May I remind you what happened with Haas when they put in that last-minute protest regarding track limits at Austin 2023 regarding Checo? They did so right at the last minute before the right to reply or review was expiring for that Austin Grand Prix. And then ultimately that led to a change that period had been shortened considerably because Haas just wanted points for Hülkenberg through litigation rather than pace on the track. But okay, why is Red Bull targeting McLaren so persistently? Well, there are quite a few reasons here, let's be real. It's a case of McLaren, who was once the hunter, now being the hunted. And And let's not forget, for years while Red Bull were at the top, many teams were scrutinising them and questioning the legitimacy of their car. The same thing happened with Mercedes. Oh, the DAS thing? Oh, that was the biggest example of it all. This just happens with the leading car, that every other team just goes, well, why didn't we think of this? Surely there has to be something wrong with this. And now we've got social media, the fans of each team can back them up, and that's why we come up with all of these monikers for McLaren as Cheat Claren, or one I heard was actually not too bad, McLaren. But ultimately it comes down to Red Bull no longer being the hunted, and them scrambling around for answers as to why they are not. By stirring doubt, Red Bull is trying to maintain control of the narrative, compelling McLaren to defend itself all the time, drawing the FIA's attention away from other teams, which maybe distract McLaren from developing their car any further through a potential order which may set them back several weeks, scrapping tons of work and lost resources. Now, naturally, this would buy Red Bull some time, and it might bring them back into play, because if the McLarens haven't got the advantage, and if the flexi-wing technical directive thing happens by race 9, then everything could be back into play again, and we could easily have a competitive season, albeit with McLaren having a slight buffer like Red Bull did last year. But clearly, this is not something that is sitting well with the likes of Toto Wolff, using noise and complaints to try and get ahead instead of just building a better car, which is why Toto has now come into play here between this battle between Zak and Christian. But still, Red Bull seem much more eager to just prove that McLaren has been cheating in some way, rather than admitting to the world and to themselves that, technically speaking, they were outdone. Or maybe admit that their technical team had just become rather stubborn and they weren't willing to admit that they'd gone down the wrong path, a la Pierre Vacher, Checo and Max last year. Then let's not forget all the mind games that we have seen between Zak and Christian. That is just another factor in all of this. This is just the biggest chapter, but now bringing the cars in rather than just the characters. Because accusations in the media can double as psychological warfare. Leaking speculation about McLaren's performance can unsettle the fans, the sponsors, and even McLaren's own staff, them keen not to be caught up in anything dodgy. These distractions can lead to wasted energy on legal defence in the steward's room instead of trying to find more performance. And clearly, it has not worked because, as we have seen, both Andrea Stella and Zak Brown have been welcoming all the scrutiny, allowing the FIA to come in, take a look, and if something is found out, then they will be more than happy to satisfy the FIA and prove that it was merely a mistake or it was trying to help the FIA in their own investigations with censors. They do comply rather quickly, and then the matter is closed, and then we find out that McLaren's pace has not really been affected at all. That's not the reaction that Horner probably hoped for. And then it might be something to do with the cost cap and the matter of convergence that Christian Horner keeps talking about in any interview that you see him in. He talks about, oh, you see, with convergence, it brings everyone really close, which means that, you know, a couple of tenths here or there can see you either on pole position or out of Q3 or something like that. And while that doesn't justify cheating allegations, it explains Red Bull's growing frustration, perhaps. Pushing the FIA for clarifications could yield interpretations that slow McLaren or tilt regulations back toward the rest of the pack. But the tactics risk backfiring. And trust me, there is no way that Christian will want to admit that he is actually on the same page as Toto. Now, yes, this is nothing new about teams complaining about what the main leading team is doing. May I remind you of all the stuff that Red Bull was accused of last year with that mysterious brake thing, which we saw in Melbourne with one of Max's brakes being caught fire, but then was ultimately never proved because it's so dug deep into the machinations of the system that you couldn't easily see it from the pit wall or something. Oh, and let's not forget what happened in Austin with the T-tray or the bib. Many people are suspecting that that could easily be raised or lowered in between Parc Fermé sessions, raising concerns about floor flexing and porpoising in 2022. That was mentioned. And then probably one of the biggest one, which did involve McLaren, was that mysterious third pedal that was picked up by a photographer in 1998. So that means they had extra means to turn by just braking even harder certain wheels. And whilst these situations didn't result in extreme punishments, they were just told to, oi, get rid of that part, or they had to amend it slightly so that it would then comply with the rules, we do have a situation where dominant teams still are subjected to the smaller teams trying to bring them back into play. The FIA's Nicholas Tombassis has echoed the sentiment, stating that finger pointing, it's always been part of F1. Again, cat and mouse, it will never stop. And with every single time this happens, I can easily imagine that more and more voices will be going towards what McLaren and Mercedes are saying. The FIA is just like, yeah, look, Red Bull, McLaren's just made a really good car here. Let's just try and develop it, or just let them have it and focus on next year and just be done with it. Just put simply, they managed to develop this car from where it was in 2022 a very, very long way. And I just don't think that Christian Horner and Red Bull are willing to admit that, because then it would admit that, yes, their technical team had messed up. And that will give Max Verstappen vindication and maybe further reasoning that things may not change. It may remain the same and give him more just cause to leave or something like that. But like I have mentioned throughout this entire video, the situation where Wolff has been backing Zak Brown could easily come into play here and say that there is obviously some sort of bias going on here regarding the relationship that McLaren and Mercedes have. Because you might be saying, well, okay, this is Mercedes just supporting a customer team. Well, the relationship they have with McLaren is slightly more than that. I think Zak Brown referred to it as a seat at the table arrangement, rather than your simple customer deal that Williams and Aston Martin currently have. It means that potentially McLaren has some sort of input or influence over the Mercedes power unit. Not a lot, but some. Not to mention, I think Mercedes would take a dim view if they realised that McLaren had been playing dirty. They wouldn't have extended the partnership through 2030 had it come to light that there was something nefarious going on with this car. Because I doubt that Toto would want his engines and his badge to be attributed to teams who could flout the rules and be cheating underneath the surface. It would reflect badly on him for choosing them as partners, and especially ones with a seat at the table. Not to mention, it could easily give Christian Horner more ammunition to clap back at them both. Especially when you've got the ongoing situation with the 2026 power units. It will just be gold for the likes of Horner. I can imagine that Christian will come up with some sort of analogy saying, "Oh, Toto, he doesn't know his head from his elbow," or something like that. But for now, Mercedes' stance is clear, that McLaren has the credibility to justify all the situation, why Toto says that they are totally legit. And hey, from their point of view, at least one of their engines is beating Red Bull, and right now, if it remains where it is, right now the works team will be beating Red Bull as well. So a Mercedes-powered 1-2, very nice. And another reason why I think Red Bull is extra jumpy regarding protests and what have you might have something to do with the driver's market. No, I'm not saying Max Verstappen is about to leave or anything like that. We know about all the performance clause stuff, so I won't bore you with the details there. But it's something to do with Zak Brown revealed just a few days ago, which sort of slipped people by, and someone in the comments pointed out to me to potentially be the topic for this video, and arguably inspired me to actually make it. Because McLaren's momentum is reverberating beyond the paddock, and its good standing with the FIA could easily see it become a real sought-after place for prospective drivers. And then something that reportedly took place before Piastri's contract was extended through 2028 was Zak Brown contacting Verstappen's manager in the off-season. Him not necessarily trying to make a move, but just to put out some feelers, see where things may stand about potential domino effects, according to Brown, that may befall the drivers' market in the next few years. Yeah, he might have flirted with the idea of maybe seeing what Max was like, his availability and his price, which then Verstappen joked a few days later saying that, oh, Zak balked at my price tag, and then they had a laugh about it or something like that. At least Zak, as he said, he knows where he stands, he's got all that he needs to know. That there was some contact with McLaren and Verstappen's camp. Again, this didn't result in anything. Brown was on a fact-finding mission, and it wasn't really going to amount to anything unless there was a genuine surprise move about to be on the foot for Lando or Oscar should things result in a surprising 2025. But honestly, I think the message was clear here, that McLaren wants to be seen as the place to be for any member of F1's elite, and it's not afraid to tread on the toes of its incumbent drivers to say, hey, look, right now, we're the best. If things were to change, we could easily replace you. Now, yes, that mentality does not sit well with me, because I have grown up with McLaren being the underdogs here and wanting to band together in solidarity and unity. So this kind of stance, it rubs me up the wrong way, honestly, but it's accurate. They're the best. The best drivers want to drive the best cars and be part of the best team. So honestly, if McLaren weren't doing this, they'd be doing something wrong. They'd be incredibly naive, because what would happen if we got a situation a la Daniel Ricciardo in 2018, where either Lando or Oscar, not liking where the wind was blowing in McLaren, suddenly decides to go to another team, they're welcomed in with open arms, and then McLaren's down a big-name driver. They wouldn't really know what was going on in the market. Other drivers may be snapped up. They might have to resort to calling back Gabriel Bortoletto. But then I think he's not attached to the McLaren program anymore, so then they would have to buy him out of his Audi contract. It would get really, really messy. I mean, the only thing they could possibly do is just talk to Williams and see if they could get Carlos Sainz back. But at the same time, it keeps competitors on edge, that maybe there could be an opportunity at McLaren, and reminds their existing drivers that excellence is the standard, that egos can be checked at the door. But yes, until we get the smoking gun where McLaren has been definitely caught with its pants down, as far as the FIA is concerned and the wider world, McLaren are playing above table. That everything is legit, everything's a-okay. Mercedes has no cause for concern, and they provide the power units for this McLaren team. They wouldn't want to be doing business with anyone that was underhanded and could easily pull off something akin to Spygate. So until the technical directive for the flexi-wing comes in around Spain, and things could easily change, McLaren are sitting pretty at the moment with over 100 points to their second place rivals Mercedes in the Constructors. This is pretty good stuff for them. But what is really playing right now is a really interesting narrative that there's some sort of thriller going on here with no definitive culprit. This is something really fascinating in the sense that we've now got Toto, Zak, Christian just exchanging barbs with one another. Toto and Zak doing their best to just make Christian look rather silly, that he's just flapping in the breeze, not sure what to do with Red Bull, they're not sure what to do with themselves, and led by Brown and Stella, McLaren are embracing the pressure. Every single time I've seen Zak take a dig towards Horner, it's about making McLaren look strong, together, unified, willing to give young drivers opportunities, everything that he believes that Red Bull isn't. And that all stems down to the whole water bottle thing with the word tyre water on it. Yeah, you might think it's just light-hearted banter and japery, but it's all down to the fact of McLaren wanting to just assert to the world they are not cheaters. They are more than happy to welcome the FIA in and show them that they are on the level, and that Red Bull, what they're saying, oh, it's just noise, which is what Toto's been saying. That Red Bull's thing has been a lot of noise. These two are banding together right up at the top. Ferrari staying out of this, quite frankly, and Red Bull, they're just made to look like clowns. And Christian, he's not going to back down, because we saw how far this went with the whole Jeddah Turn 1 thing, having printouts of the corner itself, trying to fight Max's cause, because of course his mouth was shut, he wasn't saying anything. So what better way to get the spin doctor to speak on his behalf almost about that corner was his, but he got pushed out by Piastri. But I don't want to get into that debate here. But the fact of the matter is, though, Horner's on the back foot, Wolf and Brown aren't, and Mercedes want to really just see Red Bull squirm right now, right before they become a works team themselves. But if Red Bull's concerns do end up being valid, they will eventually be substantiated through formal protest, and it will prove to Max that McLaren's ill-gotten gains were the reason why Red Bull couldn't give him a car that could give him his 5th world title, and maybe could retain some faith in the team that he could see out his contract. Until then, the message is pretty sound, honestly, that, just because you're fast, it doesn't mean you're cheating. It may be just simply great engineering, and that was partly developed by the guy who helped Red Bull be good in terms of engineering themselves, Rob freaking Marshall. And yes, this is another part of the ongoing concerns fielded by Horner to stave off potential shortcomings of their own for next year, most recently noted by the whole power unit thing. To find out more about that particular story and why Toto and Christian it's all kicking off again, watch this video next, straight after this one.